We are 1 week into the free agency period, and there are still a couple of positions that the Panthers could address ahead of the draft. What are those? We'll talk about that right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Fridays throughout the offseason, right here on the show, I'm answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. And the way you get those questions to me is by either adding me or DMing me over on Twitter and following me, of course, on Blue Sky as well, and adding me over there with your weekly Friday mailbag questions. Today's episode of Locked On Panthers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And we are 1 week into the free agency period here in the NFL. Technically, we're only 5 days, as free agency didn't technically begin until Wednesday last week, but we all know Monday, when the legal negotiating period began, that's the unofficial start of free agency. So we're a week into the Panthers having the ability to add players to the roster to try to really go for it in 2025. And what does go for it means? It means going for the NFC South title, which, as long as this division doesn't have a dominant head coach or a dominant quarterback, it's going to be a wide open division here in the NFL. We see, like, up in the AFC East, you got McDermott, who I guess you can question how great of a coach Sean McDermott is, but he's obviously been a good coach there in Buffalo. But they have Josh Allen, and nobody else in that division as a quarterback as of this moment as good as Josh Allen. Look at the AFC West. Andy Reid, certainly a phenomenal coach, a future Hall of Famer. Patrick Mahomes, best quarterback in the NFL. Nobody else in the AFC West, even with Pete Carroll now there in Las Vegas with the Raiders, has a head coach and a quarterback combination that comes anywhere near close to what they have in Kansas City. That's not the case here in the NFC South right now. You have Kellen Moore down there in New Orleans now with Derek Carr. Kellen Moore, TBD. Derek Carr, we already know he's not it. Todd Bowles has been fine when he's at a quarterback, whether it's been in New York or Tampa, and Baker Mayfield has been good in Tampa. But still, there's a question of when's the other shoe going to drop there at Baker? Can he continue to play as well as he's played so far as a Buck? And then in Atlanta, Raheem Morris didn't work out the first time in Tampa. Second time around, you would have thought last year was going to be the year Atlanta was going to win the division. Well, silly me for believing that, and silly anyone for believing that, because it's the Falcons, and what do you know? The Falcons were not able to get it done. They, dare I say, falconed once again, so pretty open. So that's what I mean by go for it. And Carolina went out there last week, added pieces to the defensive line, getting Turk Wharton from Kansas City, adding Bobby Brown III as well as a new addition from the Los Angeles Rams. Up front, they got Patrick Jones, the second to be an edge rusher for them. Trevon Moore, a big signing there in the secondary. At safety, re-signed Mike Jackson, gave J.C. Horn the highest contract in the history of defensive backs here in the National Football League. A nice start defensively and offensively as Brady Christensen's coming back, Austin Corbett's coming back, Cade Mays is coming back. The entirety of the offensive line is coming back to Carolina. Tommy Trimble's back in town as well. I think a really good start for Carolina in a division that, again, is still gettable. So that's what they're going for, hopefully, here in 2025. But there's still 3 positions that I'm looking at during the rest of this free agency period heading into the draft, which free agency may already be over, that I think Carolina should still try to address and wonder if they're going to address. And let's start off with the one that we talked a lot about on Friday during the weekly Friday mailbag, and that is wide receiver. I had big hopes and dreams that Carolina could land a wide receiver 1 this offseason. And now that was probably always going to be a pipe dream and not that realistic, considering how difficult it was going to be just financially and then also trade compensation wise in order to get a player like that. We've seen T. Higgins, who, according to multiple reports as of this recording on Sunday afternoon, he and Jamar Chase are very close to signing big-time extensions with the Cincinnati Bengals, that's going to total like $70 million, $75 million. That's why Cincinnati should just taken care of it last offseason instead of waiting. But T. Higgins, he will not be a Carolina Panther. That's going to stay what Joe Burrow wanted in Cincinnati with those two guys, NT and Jamar, sticking around. Cooper Kupp never really seemed to be interested. Also, Carolina never seemed to be interested in him as he stays out west, goes back home, and is now going to be a Seattle Seahawk. Chris Godwin, much like Mike Evans last year, he was never leaving Tampa. DK Metcalf made a lot of sense. I've not seen any concrete reporting that's saying that Carolina had made an offer. I would not be surprised had they made an offer. They were willing to give him what he wanted, the $30 million per year. Either way, he's headed to Pittsburgh to be a Steeler, and there's still a question about who's going to be their quarterback up there in Pittsburgh. And then Garrett Wilson, I'm crossing him out as well. That's one where, of course, we saw on Twitter that Garrett Wilson was talking about Bryce Young and how he's turned things around. He's taken notice, and the situation in New York where they got rid of their head coach and Robert Saleh, their general manager and Joe Douglas, and Aaron Rodgers was on his way out, and that did not work out the way that Garrett Wilson and anyone in New York hoped that it would. There was questions whether he might ask for a trade, if he may leave, and if Carolina could be a home. I never understood that, because for New York, why would you give up one of the young ascending receiving talents for anything less than a haul? And also, how does that help your quarterback coming in? Now that the quarterback coming in is Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson's teammate from The Ohio State University, I don't think Garrett Wilson is out there on the board. Brandon Ayuk, who someone else brought up last week, I'm not a huge fan of Brandon Ayuk necessarily. He could elevate, obviously, what they have here in Carolina, and that should be something that they could be interested in. So we'll see what they do. But as of right now, the only receiving moves that they've made is re-signing Dan Chisena, who's been mainly a special teams player. He came in and played some key snaps late in that Arizona Cardinals game that Carolina won in overtime. They have reworked the deal with Adam Thielen in his final year, and they have given him not an extension, but a raise. So re-signing Dan Chisena and giving Adam Thielen a raise are the only two moves Carolina has made at wide receiver during this free agency period. Now, David Moore is still available. He's someone who had the best year he's had since he left Seattle back during the pandemic in 2020. And I feel like he would be somebody that Carolina should bring back, considering he was with Dave Canales, the year prior in Tampa when no one else was giving an opportunity. Last year, when they had the injured Adam Thielen, when Deontay Johnson stepped away, was traded away from Carolina, he came in and he played some solid ball as well. And that's Jalen Coker was out as well. So David Moore, I think that would make sense for him to come back to Carolina. We'll see how that works out. But there's names out there like Tyler Lockett, who obviously would have ties to the staff, much like he has ties to the staff there in Las Vegas with Pete Carroll there. Keenan Allen, he's from North Carolina. His cousin apparently listens to the show, and we were DMing and saying, yeah, Keenan comes here every summer. And I was like, hey, why don't you tell your cousin to stick around and play here in Carolina? Stephon Diggs coming off an ACL, that's a name, but I'm not quite sure about that. And culturally in the locker room, if that's what they want. Amari Cooper was certainly a massive disappointment once he went to Buffalo last year after being traded by the Cleveland Browns. So those are the names. Like Lockett, I could see it. The rest of them, I mean, Allen, sure, I'd like to see that. Diggs, Cooper, I'm not that excited about what else is out there as far as the name receivers that are still available in this second week of free agency. But there are two names that I'm very curious about that may make sense for Carolina. The first one is Elijah Moore, who last year played with the Browns, had a career high 61 receptions, 538 yards receiving, and a touchdown. And I did not watch Cleveland at all last season. Why? Because they were terrible. It's the Cleveland Browns. And even when they're good, I'm not that interested in Cleveland. But looking at just his stats a year ago and just looking at PFF, he actually was the 110th rated wide receiver according to PFF out of 133. So while his stats did look encouraging, Pro Football Focus did not see him very highly as he played out wide and his slot. So the ability to move around is what you would love to see from a receiver like Elijah Moore. But the stats, they are impressive, and they would have been one of the tops here on the team in Carolina this past year. And the other receiver I'm looking at is Noah Brown, who's been a veteran, who's traveled around, was up in Washington last year. Really nice veteran piece for Jaden Daniels as a rookie with the Commanders as they went to the NFC title game. 35 receptions, 453 yards, and a touchdown for Noah Brown a year ago. And actually, PFF did like his season far more than they liked Elijah Moore's season, as he was the 54th graded receiver in the NFL according to PFF last year, and that's again out of 133. He had a 70.7 offense grade, 70.2 receiving grade, and he would have been the second highest graded receiver that was in Washington last year, as Terry McLaurin was 16th. So Noah Brown, as a vet, still under 30, and you can probably get him on a one-year deal that's fairly cheap if they want to add a piece who can play out wide and can be able to add some veteran presence here and has helped out a younger quarterback, even though difference with Jaden Daniels was a rookie and Bryce Young's now going to the third year, but still wanted to add some talent to that room, elevate the floor and potentially the ceiling. I would think that would make some sense to go out there and get Noah Brown as a veteran in that locker room. So Noah Brown, Elijah Moore, those are two names I'm really looking at. Tyler Lockett, Keenan Allen could be interested as far as the receivers that we've known about for the last decade here in the NFL. But Stephon Diggs, Mari Cooper, not that interested based off of Cooper's lack of impact in Buffalo, and also Diggs coming off of a significant knee injury there after last season. So that's kind of looking at wide receiver. I still feel like if Carolina's going to find that A1 wide receiver type player that they really would like, and I think that they need down the road, it's going to have to come via the draft. And I don't know if this is the draft class where they're going to get that kind of player. It's certainly possible. I'm imagining that there's going to be maybe one or two of the guys that get drafted in this class that end up being that. Puka Nacua was taken in like the 5th round a couple years ago, and now he's the top option in LA alongside Devontae Adams and Cooper Kupp. They felt comfortable moving away from Cooper Kupp because of, well, the contract, but also the emergence of Puka Nacua. So who says that you have to get a receiver in the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd rounds? It could happen there in day 3 in the 5th round, like with LA, and they could get a guy like that. So I think it's going to come down to drafting, developing for Carolina to really get that big time wide receiver, because they tried, I think, probably via trade, and well, it did not work out, at least this cycle. So we'll see what they decide to do down the road. But I think bringing back David Moore makes sense, and trying to maybe add someone like Noah Brown or Elijah Moore could also make sense for Carolina as they add a little bit more depth and experience there at wide receiver here heading into the draft cycle. So that's where I stand at wide receiver at this point in time. Kicker. Carolina could pay Eddy Pineiro, but Dan Morgan made it sound like they may not do that. Is there still a possibility of a reunion for Pineiro in Carolina? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDON NFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDON NFL for half off your first year. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, when you win, when we win, we all get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Back here on Locked On Panthers, taking a look at a couple of positions the Panthers could address prior to really focusing in on the draft portion of the offseason. 1 week into free agency, the Carolina Panthers went out there and were really good at trying to find some pieces to fill out that defense, adding a couple pieces to the defensive line, to the edge rusher group there in the secondary, bringing back some key players like Mike Jackson, like Tommy Trimble, like Austin Corbett, Brady Christensen. So excited to see what they can do moving forward here through the rest of free agency and then heading into the draft, as there will be a big decision to make there at 8th overall once they get to that Thursday night up in Green Bay, Wisconsin next month. Now, kicker, though, that is an area that Carolina still has not necessarily addressed in my mind. I know that last month in February, they signed Matthew Wright to a futures contract. Matthew Wright has been here briefly in Carolina. He's made a couple of other stops in the NFL as a backup kicker to come in while another guy was injuring or a team was struggling to find a guy. So there's a possibility that Matthew Wright could be the starter in Carolina this upcoming season. I just wonder, is that truly what their plan is? And if you go back to a couple of weeks ago at the scouting combine up in Indianapolis, Dan Morgan was asked about the kicker spot and asked about Eddy Pineiro and his future. And he said, quote, "We're still going through all of that. Brant, myself, and Coach Canales just really want the plan and what the plan is going to be. We are going to let Eddy test the market. Definitely not going to close the door on that. But at the same time, we will be actively looking." And if they were actively looking for a kicker, I have not seen anyone arise that they would want to sign. Now, the guys I look at that could make the most sense for Carolina as far as veteran kickers out there, Greg Joseph, he could make some sense. Austin Seibert could make sense. I suppose Joey Sly, but do you really want to do that all over again? Understanding that neither one of those guys that were brought up, Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, or Dave Canales, were here in Carolina during the Joey Sly era, which also was the Matt Rule era, unfortunately. So I don't think that they're going to think about what he did in Carolina. They're going to look at what he's done, in his entire career. I don't know if y'all want to see that again. So I'm just looking around, and Pineiro keeps coming out with the stat where he's one of the most accurate kickers in the history of the NFL. And it's true. He's third most accurate in the history of the NFL. Last year, didn't necessarily have the greatest of years, but he has been fairly reliable when it comes to those game-winning kicks. And it's not like they've ever asked him to go out there with 3 seconds on the clock and bang home a 55, 57-yard field goal, which oftentimes can be asked of kickers. We've seen guys like Justin Tucker in the past, Harrison Butker in the past, two other guys who are some of the most accurate kickers in the history of the NFL, be able to do that on a fairly consistent basis. We even saw Graham Gano when he was here in Carolina be able to do that. We have not seen Eddy Pineiro asked to do that just yet. It's been like 35 yarders or 40 yarders. It hasn't really been anything from 50 plus that they've asked him to do. And he has not really attempted that many or made that many field goals from 50 plus yards, which I think is what the hangup would be for Carolina. While yes, Eddy, you're accurate, you don't have the biggest leg, and that can limit down the 35 to the 40-yard line. And I know if it's like 4th and 5, you want to see Carolina kick it, or sorry, not kick it, you want to see them go for it. But if you have a kicker who's pretty reliable from that yardage, then hell, go ahead, kick it, get the 3 points, and see what you can do from there. But I don't know if they have a kicker right now. I mean, I would say with Pineiro, they don't necessarily have a kicker that you can feel 100% confident about in those situations. And, well, just watch the games and you can see how they feel about him when it comes to that time. Now, I've looked at this. The kind of deal that he wants is not going to be that prohibitive cap-wise. And Carolina still, when looking at overthecap.com, has a lot of salary cap space. They have $25 million. Now, that is not right now including the contracts of Javon Morig, Patrick Jones, and Rico Dowdle. Now, Morig is the one that is obviously the much bigger of those 3 contracts. Jones is was a 2-year deal. What was it? Maybe it was a 3-year deal. I already forgot what it was. Let's see. Patrick Jones was a 2-year deal, $15 million. I mean, it's probably really just a 1-year deal. Rico Dowdle, that's nothing. He's a 1-year, $2.7 million deal. Whereas with Morig, it's 3 years, $51 million. And a lot of these cap hits so far, we're looking at some of the guys that have been added. Like Sam Martin's a punter. His cap hit's $1.6 million. That is 0.6% of the salary cap. So that's absolutely nothing. You look at Christian Roseboom. His is $2.5 million. That's 0.9% of the salary cap. Bobby Brown III, it's $3.1 million. That is 1.1% of the salary cap this upcoming season. So you kind of catch where I'm going here. Like, they're signing players like Turk Wharton to these $45 million contracts, and his cap hit is $6.5 million next year, and it's 2.3% of the cap. You can't sign Eddy Pineiro to a strong kicker deal and keep him around 1.5% of the salary cap. Because you look at Butker, he is getting a 3.7 mil average guarantee. So, APY, that's what we're looking for. Average per year is 6.4 per year. And you look at his cap hit this upcoming season, it's $1.3 million. Going back to kickers, Justin Tucker, we'll see what happens with him in his circumstance, but he's getting $6 million per year, and that is 2.3 mil. Like, they've been able to maneuver the cap. There's a reason why they brought in Brant Tillis to handle these situations so that Carolina could spend the money they spent on day one of the legal negotiating period on defensive pieces and then not be hamstrung for the rest of the offseason, even have money heading into the season once everything rolls around in September. So I just don't understand why they wouldn't be interested. I'm not saying they're not interested, and Dan said they're not going to close the door, but to me, it's always felt like a no-brainer. And Mike K's come up here from the Charlotte Observer and said that this organization, at least the front office they have now, does not view kicker as a spot they want to spend a lot of money on. Like, dude, if you're spending 0.6% of the cap for a guy who may be your starting linebacker, why the hell would you not be willing to spend 1% for a guy who could be your starting kicker, and knowing that that can cost you games so often in the NFL? That's just how I feel about it. We'll see what they decide to do. But right now, that's an area that they have not addressed. But according to Dan Morgan, they'll be looking. And Eddie's been allowed to test the market, and that market has not bore out at least the way he would want it to so far, as he remains unsigned, even though I'm guessing kickers weren't exactly top priority. But this has not necessarily been the deepest free agency class. So what's going on? All right, let's take a quick pause. We'll come back and let's talk about one more position that I would love to see Carolina address heading into the draft right here on Locked On Panthers. Three weeks at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, Dan Morgan talked about how the tight end room was very thin for Carolina, as JT Sanders is really the only player that he had mentioned. Now, if you look at Panthers.com, after Carolina has brought back Tommy Tremble, this is the current tight end room. Tommy Tremble, JT Sanders, Jordan Matthews, James Mitchell, and Dominique Daphne, who, apologies to him and his family, I have no idea who that is. And if you do know who he is, please do tell, inform me. But Dominique Daphne is here on the roster as someone who's going to go through the offseason portion, and we'll see if he makes it to camp. But that's the tight end room. And you look at it like, okay, Tremble, 2-year deal. He's going to be a player that's going to play plenty of snaps, obviously, this upcoming season. JT Sanders, excited to see what kind of jump he makes in his second year as he improves as an inline blocker. And it also adds that element as a pass-catching tight end. Jordan Matthews, been a nice story, who had played receiver, then converted to tight end and was able to make the roster last year. Then I think they cut him, but then brought him back. But he was able to start week 1 down there in New Orleans and be a helpful piece for Carolina in the locker room and also on the field. And James Mitchell, out of Virginia Tech, he was a pretty intriguing prospect, was a 5th rounder, and has bounced around so far. Did get a decent amount of snaps back in Detroit his first year as a rookie, and then hasn't really caught on anywhere. He's intriguing to me, and I'm curious to see how that one works out. But this still is a pretty deep tight end class that's coming out here in the draft. Tyler Warren is the top of it, and an 8th overall. That could be an option. I know people have brought it up. We talked about it 2 weeks ago on the mailbag here on the show, and I'm not necessarily opposed, especially after looking at what they've done so far during free agency defensively. Like edge rusher, though, still feels like what I think they should go after. And Jalen Walker from Salisbury out of University of Georgia is still who I'm looking at with the 8th overall pick. But you got Colson Loveland out of Michigan as well. You look at a guy like Gunnar Helm, who came in and took over once JT Sanders left Texas. He was really good last season. There's a ton of guys to look at, especially day 2, that really could make sense at tight end. But I'm wondering if they would want to add another veteran piece there. I know that Jordan Matthews is technically a veteran, but he's not necessarily a veteran at the position. Tommy is the only one, and JT has 1 year under his belt, and a lot of that was spent developing. And also, he kind of missed a couple of games there. He didn't miss game. He missed like 1 game. But then, like the last month of the season, you kind of wonder what was going on there. Gerald Everett, someone I brought up prior to free agency starting because of the ties that he does have with the staff. Last year was not a great year for him in Chicago, but his last year in Seattle with a lot of these guys, he did play pretty well. And Pat McPherson is still a tight end coach here in Carolina. So he would be somebody I would think that would want to advocate for him, along with Canales and everybody else who was in Seattle at that time, if they do want him. Tyler Conklin has got to be the top tight end out there on the market right now. Was in New York the last couple of years, has gone unsigned up until this point. I would wonder if you're looking for a veteran who is a proven pass catcher, you add him, and you could still draft one if you wanted to. Now, I don't know. That might preclude them from wanting to draft a tight end if they decide to go down that route. And I do wonder, like Stephon Sullivan and Ian Thomas are still available. And now I'm not expecting either one of these guys to come back to Carolina and to make any sort of strong, notable impact. I just know that they got to fill out the 90-man roster at some point in time. And the fact that both of those guys have experience here, Sullivan going back to the time even with these guys in Seattle, maybe there's a reunion there for both of them. But as far as like just the guys that are still available that are veterans like Everett and Conklin, I'm curious to see if they would want to do that, or do they feel comfortable enough with Tommy Trimble, JT Sanders, and Jordan Matthews as that trio right now to then where they would drop in a rookie with those guys, or would they rather go Trimble, Sanders, get like an Everett or a Conklin, and then still get a rookie once draft time comes around there at tight end? Like that may be the best scenario for this group, going from really what's not been a great tight end room at all to, okay, I see what the plan is, and I see that this can be an impactful group moving forward. So that's just another area I'm looking at. Edge rusher, you could say as well, possibly that they can go get one. Of all the Bengals that are apparently getting contracts, as you saw, BJ Hill stayed there, which was a surprise, and that they were able to now looks like they're going to come to terms with Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. No reporting on Trey Hendrickson. None as far as they're going to come to terms with him and everything's going to be all right. So we'll see. If Carolina's interested, again, we've talked about this, may not be the best scheme fit as far as he's a guy who wants to put his hand in the dirt, not stand up. What will happen there? I think edge rusher could still be a spot Carolina maybe wants to add one more piece there, but that's, I think right now has got to be the top option there at 8. All right. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, because on Fridays I'm answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions here all throughout the offseason, either at me or DM me over on Twitter or at me over on Blue Sky to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Tuesday.